The veil between. Megan had never believed in the supernatural. Growing up, she dismissed ghost stories as nothing more than tales to frighten children, the stuff of imagination and overactive minds. But after the death of her husband, Alex, nothing seemed to make sense anymore. She couldn't escape the silence of her empty house, a constant reminder of the life she had lost. Each room echoed with memories of happier days, and each shadow seemed to whisper his name. Despite her best efforts to carry on, nothing helped the suffocating loneliness that seemed to settle deep within her chest. Days turned into weeks, and Megan did what she could to fill the empty space, going through the motions of daily life. She worked, she ate, she slept, though none of it brought her comfort. She found herself clinging to the small things, the smell of his cologne still lingering on his favorite chair, the slight creak of the floorboards when she entered their bedroom, the sound of his laughter that seemed to echo faintly in the corners of her mind. But that was all it was. Echoes. One evening, while scrolling through social media on her phone, she stumbled upon a post that seemed to speak directly to her pain. It was a video of someone demonstrating a modern way to use a Ouija board to connect with lost loved ones. The idea seemed absurd, but there was something about it that tugged at her. She watched the video several times, her heart beginning to race with the possibility that it might work. What if I could just talk to him one more time? Maybe I could find some peace, she thought. It was a thought she could barely shake, a thought that made her both curious and terrified. But her desperation to reconnect with Alex, to hear his voice again, pushed her forward. That night, she opened the old closet where she had stored their things. There, tucked behind forgotten mementos, she found it, the Ouija board. It had been a joke gift from Alex, something they had laughed about years ago. They never took it seriously, but now, with her grief eating away at her sanity, she couldn't help but see it as a last hope. She set it up in the living room, where they had spent countless hours together, the place that still held the warmth of their love. She lit a candle, watching the flickering light dance on the walls, the shadows moving as if they were alive. With trembling hands, she placed her fingers lightly on the planchette, closing her eyes for a moment to steady her breath. She whispered, "Alex, if you're here, please come through." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but in the stillness of the room it felt as though the very walls were listening. At first, nothing happened. Megan held her breath, waiting for some sign, but there was only the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She was just about to pull her fingers away when, without warning, the planchette shifted. It wasn't much, just a slight movement, but it was enough to make her gasp. She leaned in closer, her pulse quickening with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Alex, is it really you?" she asked, her voice a whisper now, filled with uncertainty. The planchette moved again, this time more deliberately. It slid across the board, slowly but with purpose, stopping at the word, "yes." Megan's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't believe it. Was it really him? Could this possibly be real? Tears welled in her eyes as a rush of emotion flooded her chest. She couldn't stop herself from speaking again, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Are you okay? Where are you?" The planchette moved again, slower this time, as though it was struggling to find the right words. Finally, it stopped at HELP. Megan frowned, confusion clouding her thoughts. Help? Help with what? She looked around the room as though expecting Alex to appear in the corner, just as he used to when he would surprise her with a warm smile and a hug. But there was no sign of him. only the cold, empty rooms surrounding her. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and a chill ran down her spine. It was so cold that she could see her breath in the air, white puffs rising with each exhale. The candle on the table flickered violently, as if something had disturbed the air. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, darker, stretching like fingers reaching toward her. Her chest tightened, as though an unseen weight had suddenly descended upon her. She opened her mouth to speak again, to ask more questions, but before she could form the words, the planchette jerked violently to the corner of the board, spelling out, "Leave." The temperature in the room plummeted even further, and Megan's heart raced in her chest. She could feel the weight of something unseen pressing down on her, suffocating her. The lights above her flickered and buzzed, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. The soft crackling of the candle seemed to amplify, now a menacing sound that grated on her nerves. Suddenly, a low, guttural voice, barely audible, echoed through the room. The words were almost unintelligible, but they sent a shock of fear through her. "Leave now." Megan's hands trembled on the planchette, and her instincts screamed at her to stop, to end the session. But she couldn't. She was paralyzed, unable to pull her fingers away from the board. The air felt thick, heavy, as if something was holding her in place, forcing her to continue. Her breath quickened, but it wasn't just the fear of the unknown that gripped her. It was a feeling that something far darker was lurking just beyond the veil. The lights in the room flickered again, more violently this time, before plunging everything into darkness. The candlelight went out, leaving her in total blackness. Panic surged through Megan's chest as the sounds of something heavy moving upstairs echoed through the house. The unmistakable sound of dragging, scraping footsteps. She stiffened, unable to move, her legs refusing to respond. Her heart hammered in her chest, the cold sweat on her skin making her feel as though she were drowning in terror. Then, the unmistakable creak of the floorboards above her. Something, or someone, was in the house with her. The air around her felt charged with malice, the silence broken only by the low groan of the house settling beneath the weight of its unseen occupant. Megan's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. But her body wouldn't obey. She tried to tear her fingers away from the board, but they seemed glued to the planchette, unwilling to let go. The room swirled around her, a nightmare folding in on itself. The planchette jerked one last time, scratching across the board, leaving a sharp, awful sound that seemed to reverberate in her bones. The voice came again, louder this time, unmistakable. "He's gone! I'm here now!" Megan gasped, her throat tight with a mix of fear and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. She had asked for Alex. She had wanted to speak to him one more time. But this wasn't him. This wasn't the voice she had known and loved for so long. This was something darker, something more sinister. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. The walls seemed to close in, the room tightening around her, suffocating her. She could feel the air thick with malevolence, a pressure pressing down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She staggered toward the door, her hand reaching for the handle, but it wouldn't turn. The door was locked, and no matter how much she pulled or twisted, it wouldn't budge. Panic surged within her, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She felt as if she were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. And then she heard it, the sound of footsteps above her, but these footsteps were not the same as before. They were slow, deliberate, and heavier, much heavier. Megan's heart skipped a beat as she realized that whatever was in the house with her wasn't upstairs. It was now with her in the room. Megan turned, slowly, her eyes widening as she saw the figure standing in the far corner of the room. The shadows twisted and writhed around it, distorting its shape as if the very darkness itself had come alive. It was tall, too tall, and its form shifted unnaturally, a grotesque distortion of a human silhouette. The air grew colder, the stench of decay filling her nostrils. It wasn't Alex. It wasn't even human. Her stomach twisted in horror as the figure took a step forward, its movements jerky, unnatural. It was as though it was piecing itself together from the shadows, a thing that had no right to exist in the world of the living. The eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with an unholy light, the faint flicker of something far older, far more sinister. "No," Megan whispered, her body trembling with fear. "No, no, no." She staggered backward, her feet tripping over the edges of the furniture. The figure didn't move quickly. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough to freeze her in place. The shadows seemed to grow darker, pressing in from every direction, as though the very walls were closing in on her. The figure spoke, its voice a low, resonating growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. "You summoned me," it said, its tone dripping with malice. "And now, you belong to me." Megan's mind raced, a scream building in her throat, but before she could react, she felt something cold, sharp, and unforgiving wrap around her throat. It was the air, but it felt like hands, tightening, choking the life out of her. The house seemed to collapse around her as the darkness deepened, swallowing her whole. She could no longer see the figure in the corner, but she could feel it, its presence lingering just beyond the veil, waiting, watching. Her body felt weightless, as though it were no longer her own. The room was spinning, the walls bending inward as though they were alive, closing in on her. A cold, clammy sweat drenched her skin, her legs given way beneath her. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. In that final moment, when everything seemed to blur together, she realized the truth. The entity was never Alex. It was a creature that had been waiting for someone like her, someone desperate enough to seek contact from beyond the grave. And now that it had her, it wouldn't let go. Her vision darkened, the light fading from her eyes as the entity whispered one final time, its voice filling her mind. "You should have left me in peace." And then, nothing. The house was silent now. The thick darkness that had enveloped it seemed to hang in the air, pressing down on everything, suffocating the very essence of the place. The oppressive weight of the evil presence still lingered, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the malevolence that had been unleashed. The once familiar surroundings of Megan's home were now a twisted mockery of themselves, the warmth of her memories replaced by the cold, empty void of something far worse. Her body lay motionless on the floor, her eyes wide and unblinking, frozen in a last moment of terror. The cold, clammy sweat had long since dried on her skin, leaving a thin, lifeless sheen that mirrored the coldness that had invaded her soul. Her lips, once full of laughter and love, were now parted in a silent scream, as if the terror of her final moments still clung to her in death. The house seemed to hold its breath. The walls, the floors, even the air itself felt different. The familiar creaks and groans of a house settling had stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness, a silence that stretched on for eternity. the kind of silence that only a place touched by something ancient and malevolent could possess. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the horrors unfolding within the house. The wind blew softly through the trees, the moonlight casting pale shadows across the lawn. But inside, there was no escape. There was no one to hear Megan's final scream, no one to offer comfort, to call for help. The world outside might have moved on, but inside the house, time seemed to freeze. It was as if the house itself had become a vessel for the evil that had claimed Megan, trapping her soul in a state of eternal unrest. And then, in the depths of that heavy silence, a faint whisper broke through the stillness. It was soft, barely audible, but it was there. A voice cold and ancient, echoing through the empty rooms. The sound was like the rustle of dead leaves in a forgotten graveyard, the voice of something that had been waiting for far longer than anyone could comprehend. "You belong to me now?" The words echoed in the air, lingering long after they were spoken, as though they had left an indelible mark on the very fabric of reality. The shadows seemed to respond, twitching in the corners of the room as if the house itself were alive, listening, waiting for the next moment of darkness to unfold. The voice had no compassion, no warmth, only the chilling finality of a truth too horrible to accept. It wasn't just Megan who had been taken. The house, too, had become part of the spirit's realm, its boundaries forever altered. The walls that once held memories of love and laughter were now witnesses to something far more sinister. The rooms where Megan had cooked dinner, read books with Alex, played with her children, were now tainted with the presence of the creature. It had taken root in the very bones of the house, feeding on the grief, the fear, and the despair that had opened the door to it. The very air seemed thick with its presence. Even the furniture, once familiar and comforting, now felt foreign, as if they were nothing more than shadows of their former selves. The living room, once filled with the warmth of Megan and Alex's love, now stood cold and abandoned. The chair where Alex had always sat seemed to loom in the corner, empty but full of foreboding. The kitchen, with its once inviting smell of freshly brewed coffee, now reeked of decay. Megan's spirit was still there, trapped, unable to escape the horror she had unleashed. She was no longer just a part of the house, she had become part of its curse. Her soul, tethered by the darkness she had invited in, was bound to the house, a prisoner of her own making. There would be no peace for her now, no reunion with Alex. She had sought contact with the dead, but instead she had crossed a line that had damned her. The house, now a prison of shadows, waited for the next soul to wander too close. It was hungry, patient. The entity that had taken Megan was not done. It was watching, waiting for another opening, another weak soul to come and seek it out, unaware of the true cost of their desire to reach beyond the veil. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a door creaking open broke the silence, but it wasn't the front door. It wasn't the door to the outside world. It was a door that had always been there, hidden from view, waiting for someone to open it. A door to another realm, another dimension, one that was not meant for the living. The whisper came again, louder this time, and with it a deep rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate through the walls. It wasn't Alex's voice anymore. It wasn't even the voice of the creature. It was something else, something deeper, older, more primal. "You belong to me now, and you will never leave." The house groaned under the weight of this new truth, its very structure trembling as if trying to fight against the curse that had been placed upon it. But it was too late. The darkness had already taken root. There was no going back, no way to undo what had been done. Megan's spirit, though trapped, was not alone. The entity that had claimed her now had her company, her grief, her regret, her broken heart. They would remain together, forever bound by the evil they had invited. The house, once a place of love and memories, had become their tomb, their prison. And so, the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead would remain forever thin in that place, always waiting, always hungry for those who dared to seek the unknown. And as the night stretched on, the whispers continued, calling out to those who might come next. The house waited, its dark heart beating in the silence, patient and ready for the next soul foolish enough to cross its threshold.